Good morning and welcome to Breakfast with Boyden. I'm Wendy Wilsker, Managing Partner at Boyden Boston, and I am so excited to welcome our guest today, Christal Cherry. Welcome so much.
Hey, Wendy, thank you for having me. Good morning and happy Friday.
Thank you. Happy Friday. So, Christal Cherry is the founder and president of the Board Pro, a consulting practice that coaches, guides, and trains and transforms their leaders to optimize their board experience by taking action and embracing their power to change their communities and the world. And I had read this short bio about Christal about a year ago, and I decided she was someone who I had to meet. And I started following Christal on LinkedIn and started learning more about the Board Pro. And I kind of made a beeline to Christal at the end of the day at last year's CASE conference on diversity and philanthropy. And we started a conversation that we continued and we continued and we continued. And so we're inviting our guest today to join us on a conversation about nonprofit boards and culture and diversity and the role of boards and CEOs. A little bit more about who Christal is and the great work that she's done. Christal has worked in the nonprofit sector for over 20 years. She has been in professional and leadership roles at the American University, the United Negro College Fund, Spelman College, Nicholas House, the Interdenominational Theological Center, Florida A&M University, Action Ministries, and the Georgia Center for Nonprofits. Oh my goodness, what an incredible career.
Wendy, I'm old.
You're not. You are very accomplished. And what I want to say also, and I want to thank you, Christal, for those of you who may not have already read this incredible collection of essays, Collecting Courage, which is a collection of essays documenting racism and survival by 14 accomplished Black fundraisers. Thank you, Christal, for sharing your experiences. It's an important read, and I feel privileged to have read this and privileged to know you and have this conversation. So
thank you.
Before we jump in to talk about boards and culture and the work that you're doing every day, tell us a little bit about your journey and how you went from frontline fundraiser to founding the Board Pro.
Yeah, thanks, Wendy. Yeah, so as you mentioned, I've been in the sector for 20 plus years working as a fundraiser in all different capacities of fundraising. Worked my way up to be a chief development officer where I had a team of folks reporting to me. And after doing this for 20 odd years, I just decided I wanted to take a break and decided I wanted to try my hand at consulting. And so I worked at the Georgia Center for Nonprofits, which is a nonprofit hub here in the Atlanta area that teaches nonprofits everything they need to know about how to lead and govern and fundraise and all of those good things. And I did that for about a year and enjoyed it and was grateful to be able to see from a back view some of the concerns and issues that our nonprofits were experiencing. But after a year or so, they decided they wanted to make me a 1099 employee. And I decided that if I was going to be a 1099 employee, that I was going to do it on my own. But I didn't want to focus on fundraising as I had been doing. I decided I wanted to do something different. And I kept thinking, where can I have some impact? Where can I still take everything that I've learned and still have an impact in the nonprofit sector? What need can I fill? And I kept thinking about those board meetings that I was sitting in all those years as a chief development officer, as a fundraiser, kind of sitting on the sidelines and listening and watching what was going on. And I said, there's a need here. I can take everything that I learned, and everything I do is from a fundraising perspective, right? Because so much of board work is fundraising work, right? In terms of building relationships, telling the story, right? To advocate for your mission. And all of those things that I did as a fundraiser, we do with board work. So I was easily able to kind of pivot and transfer everything that I had been doing into this work.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the last 2 years, every nonprofit has been, going through an internal reckoning, really looking within and looking at cultures of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Today, the first question that candidates ask us is about culture. And culture comes both from within and from external. So we know that there's so many organizations that are going through their internal learning, staff committees on DEI, a lot of internal initiatives. But I've been thinking a lot about the role that board members play in advancing cultures of inclusion and belonging. And every board is filled with incredibly generous, well-meaning people who are sharing their time, talent, and treasure. And this work is really important. So talk a little bit about how you engage board members who are on a different journey than the internal staff are in really advancing inclusive cultures.
Right. So first, while I acknowledge that nonprofit work is a business, right? You have to run it like a business, but it's touchy-feely work. It really is, not only with the people who we're serving, many of the lives that we're impacting, but the people who are working to help those people, right? And so the culture, whether it be inside the organization or on the board, is touchy-feely work. People are going to be productive, and they're going to come, and they're going to be joyous, and they're going to be involved if they enjoy what they're doing, if they feel some meaning in the work that they're doing, if they feel connected to the people that they're working with. And so you can have a great organization with a great mission, with a huge budget. And if those things are missing, people don't feel connected. They don't feel connected to the mission. They don't feel connected to the people. The leadership is poor. The environment is not affirming. They're not going to stay. And so I just think we don't emphasize that enough. And so when I talk to my fellow fundraisers who are looking to jump into a new role, I ask them questions, not only what is the mission and how much are they going to pay you and what's the budget, but who's the CEO? Who's the executive director? Who serves on that board? Yep. Have you had any informational interviews with people on the inside to understand what does it feel like? All that nuanced stuff that's not on paper. What does it feel like to be in the room when you're in that organization? And that all matters. If you have a great mission and yet you don't feel affirmed, you don't feel encouraged, you don't feel connected, it's not going to be a good look. And so same thing for board members. Board members are not paid. They're volunteers. They're just regular people like you and me, Wendy, who want to do good. Mm-hmm. And we assume that when they come to serve on the board, that they have, a PhD in board service, and they know exactly what they're supposed to do. And everybody's going to come in, they're going to love up on each other, they're going to know each other, and it's just not true. And so the impetus is on the board chair and on the executive director to create this culture where first people can have fun. And that's what I tell my board members. This should be a rewarding experience. You should come be like, I am so pumped. I have a board meeting tonight. We have a lot of great things on our agenda. We have this wonderful mission that we're all working to promote. I know this is going to be a productive meeting. I have some things to share. I know that they're going to share some things with me, and this is going to be a great experience. If they're lamenting about the board meeting tonight because, oh God, it's going to be the same agenda from last month. All they did was change the date at the top. No one is going to say anything. People are going to be asleep. You're going to have that one board member that always comes in late on their phone, right? Or the one board member who always objects to everything and makes the meeting uncomfortable. Then people are not going to want to stay on your board. And so culture is so important. And I think people don't understand that enough.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so funny. Someone once said you have the same characters around every boardroom table. And as you're talking about, oh goodness, I wish that I could have sat next to the board member who always fell asleep and, just nudged him from time to time. But I think you're so right. And, I think that the work of understanding diversity, understanding culture, understanding what it means to the impact of increasing diversity on a board and on a management team. I wonder if boards really understand how their organization and how their board will change by increasing different viewpoints, different lived experiences, different backgrounds. How do you prepare boards as they're engaging in this process, but prepare boards to be more diverse and more, and I think more welcoming and accepting?
Right. Well, before we can even talk about the diversity question, I do ask a lot about culture because we don't want to just diversify the board and start bringing people onto the board. And once they get there, the culture is not welcoming and they're not ready. It's kind of like inviting people to your home and then when they ring the doorbell, you answer the door with rollers in your hair, and your robe on, there's laundry on the table. Like, you're not ready. You've invited these people to come to your home, and then you're not ready to receive them and to entertain them. And so it's the same thing with working on a board. Before we can start bringing in diverse voices, we need to take a look around at who's on the board right now and say, wait a minute, we're all 85 years old and we're all old white men. Well, no one ever paid attention to that before. What does that mean? And are we ready as a board to start bringing in these new voices, people who don't look like us, people who don't think like us, who've had different lived experiences, who eat different foods, who listen to this different music, who celebrate different holidays. When you start introducing those kinds of differences on the board, some wonderful things will happen. I mean, there's all kinds of creative ideas. We know that boards that are more diverse are more productive. They contribute to the bottom line. All of those good things happen. However, if we've not prepared for it, if we have some folks who are closed-minded and who are not ready to hear, well, I don't agree with you on that, or I have a different view on that, or I push back on that, and that has not been the culture on your board, you may have some people who stiffen up, and they're not accustomed to having those kinds of objections and those different viewpoints. And that will make everyone in the room feel uncomfortable. So I think really doing the work first with the board that you currently have to kind of do an assessment of where you are. And there are all kinds of assessments that you can take in terms of whether or not your board is ready to receive new people, whether there's a sense of belongingness on your board. And if you've not asked people, you need to ask them, because you might find even with some of the people that you have on your board right now, they don't feel like they belong. It might be women. It might be someone who's LGBTQI. It might be someone who's in a wheelchair or who has been homeless, whatever it is, who's currently sitting on your board, who feels left out. We're not even talking about race anymore. We're talking about just in general, who's felt left out. And so I would do an assessment of your current board to see how they're feeling about all of these, all of these changes that are about to happen before you start introducing new people onto the board.
I love that because, with all of our clients, sometimes I feel like, oh, we're using that word diversity too much, like we have to get really down in the weeds and take that apart because it's too big of a word, right? And so when our clients ask us about, advancing a diverse pool of candidates, advancing diverse leadership, I want to go deep and start asking them a lot of questions too. But I think that that's where, when looking at specifically leadership, looking at the board chair and looking at the CEO and what's that important role that they play in preparing their board and their organization. So let's talk about that work with the CEO and the board chair in really setting culture. And for some organizations, we're talking about transforming culture. Yes. So how do CEOs and board chairs develop that candid conversation, that safe space of pushing each other, really being able to advance cultures?
Well, first they need to spend some time together, right? To get to know each other's strengths and each other's weaknesses so they can fill in the gaps for one another. This is really a strong partnership. And people are watching. Your job is to model, right? And so the only way for you to do that is for you to consistently meet with each other. It means having a standard meeting or bi-weekly meeting where first you can spend the first few minutes just, remember I told you, touchy-feely. How you doing? How's Susan? How's the job? How was graduation last week? Just getting to know each other. And then jumping into some of the issues that's going on inside the organization, things that are appropriate for them to talk about. And the board chair doing some active listening to support that executive director to make sure that he or she understands what the challenges he or she are feeling. In that role, that ED or CEO role can be a very lonely role. Right. And so your board chair could be your sounding board for your executive director, all the while mindful that your board chair is your boss. Right. And so you always want to paint, a lot of times EDs and CEOs want to paint this really rosy picture with their board. Everything's going great. There are no issues. I have it all handled. Don't worry about it. But you really want to have the kind of relationship with your CEO where your board chair, where you can say, listen, I'm having some challenges. I'm not sure which way to move in this. I would really love your advice. You want to make your board chair feel needed. You want to make them feel like you can, that they're trusted, and that you have this give and take relationship where he or she can really be a sounding board for you, but a source of support for you. And so that you can now start happening those authentic conversations about what's really going on inside the organization.
Right.
And the only way to do that is to get to know each other, to have a standing meeting, to bring those issues up that you know are hindering your success, allowing your board chair to weigh in, to offer support. And this goes back and forth. And so I think when you have that kind of relationship with one another, and that might even mean leaving the office, going and having coffee off site, right, where you can have candid conversations. If you're having something or a challenge going on inside the organization, and you don't want listening ears, going off site and having this candid conversation, so that both of you are clear about the strategic plan, what goals were in that plan, what are the benchmarks for those goals, what's hindering you from reaching those goals, what's going right, what's going wrong, so that you can now, once you both are clear about that, and what's the direction you should be taking, right? That when you go into your board meeting or when you go into your staff meeting, you can present as a solid duo team that we have a plan in place. We know in the strategic plan, it said we were going to do A, B, and C. It's not working, so maybe we need to pivot. Let's move this goal back. Let's move this goal forward. Let's give ourselves an extra month, or let's change the number on that goal. Like, let's figure out how to work it. But I think making sure that this relationship is solid enough where both of you have an understanding of what's needed and how each of you can play a role in supporting each other to make sure that happens. People are watching you. Role model this partnership. Let them know that you are passionate and that you understand what the needs are.
So important for every CEO and every aspiring CEO to really heed those words. Christal, when we spoke, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, you talked about your workshops are fun, and I could only imagine how much fun they are. And you said they're really hard and get emotional. And this work is hard. Talk a little bit about, because I think people are surprised how hard and how uncomfortable the journey is. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. And so I want to mention my colleague, Dr. Renee Rubin Ross, because she and I have been doing a lot of this DEI work together. And we have put this training together called Planting the Seeds of Change. It's like a 3-month deep dive training on DEI, where we really go into boards and we go all in. And we really push people to think about things that they may not have thought about before. And it's emotional. People start remembering, their childhood, the things that were said to them. And, my mom never talked to me about racism, or that was not a conversation we were told we could talk about openly, or we didn't see color, whatever it is. People start bringing up things, and it's like all of this deep stuff start pouring out. So we talk about our own personal values. We're talking about the values of the board. Like, have you created values for your board? Like, what are our values that we espouse to have? And so we start doing that kind of deep dive work. And in doing so, people get emotional. We've had tears. We have had anger. We had, in one board meeting, in board training, we had a Black man stand up and said, this is some BS, he says, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm tired of trying to convince white people that I belong here. If they don't want me on this board, I can go back to my community and I can do work with my community only. I don't have to work with them. And when he said that in this meeting with all the board members, it got like strangely quiet. I think we were all surprised by it, but he felt comfortable enough. We were glad that, and we talked about the fact that we had provided this safe space and this brave space. We talk about safe and brave spaces all the time, that he felt comfortable enough saying that. And he was angry. And so we sat there for a minute. We sat in that. We let's just sit in that. And I said to people, how does what he said make you feel? Mm-hmm. And some people said shocked. Some people said, oh my goodness, I had no idea he felt that way. Or we didn't know we had an environment where we were making him feel uncomfortable. And so we really start having those conversations where people can really start saying what's on their heart and in their minds, and not being judgmental about it, but just listening. So it's hard work, but I think if you're willing and you invest in it, in the process, we can get through it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so important, I think for all organizations, and I think that there's challenges that every nonprofit is facing in looking at their own history, in looking at who their beneficiaries are, in looking at who their clients are, who their students are. And so I think doing these exercises, taking those moments to say, how do we create a safe space? How can we have, someone has called them courageous conversations, right? How are we taking time of sharing our collective stories, listening to each other's stories, right? Sharing memories. I think part of every faith and culture is storytelling, and how sometimes sharing our own stories are filled with anger and hurt and things that need to bring up. But how effective that board that you spoke about will be able to be in the future because they were able to speak frankly and to listen. And not just be around the table hearing just the reports and the mission moments, which are really important, but digging down deeper. And, I hope that more nonprofits will put this at the top of their agenda. Send the finance reports. You don't need to spend an hour on finance. Send the reports. Maybe people will read them, maybe they don't. But you can't read this stuff. You have to be talking about it.
So, Wendy, one of the things I tell my board is, my board clients is that when you have your board members at a meeting, whether it be in person or virtual, you have their attention. This is the time to capitalize on the fact that you have their attention. They're in the room, whether it's virtual or in person. Those tedious financial reports, you can send those via email, let everyone look at them, send their questions back and forth, and then, just say whether or not you approve the report. But you don't have to go over, spend your precious time that you have with them, the hour and 20 minutes and 30 minutes that you have with them, go spending 35 minutes on the finance report. Use that time, right, that you have their attention and they're in the room to have these kinds of important conversations, meaningful back and forth conversations where they really kind of get the aha moment about what's happening. And so that they really understand that they're in the room for a reason, that their voices are needed, they needed to be heard, but not spend that time on meaningless reports and tedious points about, what flower arrangements we're going to have on the table. That kind of stuff you don't need to use your meetings for.
Absolutely. Well, you are transforming boards, and I am so excited for all of the incredible organizations that you are working with, and all of the great workshops that you're teaching and sharing your thought leadership. We could talk for hours, and I can't wait to see you again. We're both going to be on the conference route, so we'll invite other people to hop in on our conversations. We do have a tradition at Breakfast with Boyden before our guests sign off that we ask our guests to share a meaningful and memorable cup of coffee. I have my Boyden mug. I'll be sending you one, Christal. But share with us a memorable coffee that you've shared with someone over your career.
Yeah, so usually it is my tradition after I finish an assignment with a client is I meet with the person who hired me. In this particular case, it was the board chair, to just talk about what the experience was like, what was good, what was bad, what we could have done differently, what they learned. And this board chair was a white male, and he, although he hired us for the gig, was one of our biggest resistors during the training. When we start talking about white supremacy culture, he got upset. And, he insisted, he didn't have a silver spoon in his mouth, and he didn't grow up rich, and he didn't have privilege, and all of those things. Well, after doing this training where we really pushed him, we did the race stories, we did the caucusing, we did all the things that we do in our meetings, he came around. And so when we had our final debriefing and I just asked him what, he said, it was more than what I expected. You really pushed me to think about some things I had not thought about. And I do realize now that I've been complicit in many ways in what's been going on. And I assume responsibility for that. And so I just, the fact that he was such a resistor in the beginning, and that at the end he thanked me, was just affirming for me that I'm doing the right thing, that apparently I'm having an impact, that people are really feeling that what we're doing is important. And so just for him to have thanked me, and he hung in there with us, he didn't leave the trainings when it got uncomfortable, was just affirming for me that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and that it's working for a nonprofit. So
yes, thank you. I know that from reading in your book, you talk about your faith faith and finding your sense of purpose, serving the
Yes.
nonprofit sector. And you have
Yes.
clearly found an incredible purpose that's having such an impact and is really transforming so many organizations. So
Yes, I have.
Christal,
Yes.
I thank you for sharing your time with us. I appreciate you so much. I'm grateful for your friendship, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you for having me. This has been awesome.
Thank you so much.